So today I want to talk to you a little bit about, now I'm a teacher, okay, so I have to talk about reading and books because that's who I am. I love to read. Now, I've told you before that I'm an audio learner, so I listen to a lot of books and I listen to a lot of things. So some of you may know the author. So I read some fiction. I like Beverly Lewis. I also like Nicholas Sparks. Saw him in person, got a picture with him, so that was fun. But I also like nonfiction books. And I read recently Becoming Free Indeed by Ginger Volo. If you haven't read that, it's a really good one. She was raised Christian, but she tells her story there. And also, one that I'm reading right now, get this title. The title's what caught me. Thanks for the feedback. Even when it is off base, unfair, poorly delivered, and frankly, you're not in the mood. I loved that because it's teaching me how to accept feedback and also how to give good feedback. So, my story. Did you ever think about your story? Like whether your story, I'm going to talk today about being horizontal and vertical. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And if someone was to write your story, what would the author write about? First of all, would it be like realistic fiction, maybe? Or would it be a biography, or would you write it? Would it be an autobiography? Are there things you would want the author to leave out? I know I would. I'm not proud of everything that I've done, but if an author wrote about me, what would they focus on? As we look back at our lives, some of you short look because you're young, and others of us longer look because we're a little bit older. As we look back, we can sort of categorize things into two ways of thinking or two viewpoints that I want to focus us on today, horizontal and vertical. So I'm going to tell you what I mean by those, okay? Horizontal thinking focuses on me. Focuses on the things having to do with us, okay? Sometimes horizontal thinking comes around out of fear or out of discomfort in some way, but it can be, and it can turn into a selfish way of thinking if we're not careful. And a vertical way of thinking, as you can tell, thinks and includes God in those types of thinking and decisions that we make. It focuses on how God sees our lives and what paths He has for us, maybe possibilities that we never even knew existed because we are open to what God has. So what would your story be titled? Okay, so if you had your name, would it say, I'm going to use Pastor Stan Cook, the story of a horizontal life? Or would it say, Stan Cook, the story of a vertical life? And that's really what I want to talk about today, through one of my very favorite stories in the Bible, the story of Joseph. Now, I am not going to tell you the story of Joseph. That was in my original plans, but I love detail in stories, and it took way too much time. So I'm going to tell you to go to Genesis and read chapters 37 through 50. It is the best story. You know how he started off and his brothers sold him into slavery, and then he ended up in prison, and then for something he didn't do, and then he ended up, I'm really shortening it, in Egypt working for Pharaoh as the prime minister, okay? And then God brought his family all back around, just like the dreams that they had. So that's the story that I'm referring to. And we all have that story. Joseph's story took place in three main places, okay? They took place basically in his home, Canaan, okay? And then in the prison, and then in what we'll call his workplace, which was in Egypt in the palace, all right? I also have a story. Where does my story take place? Well, I thought about that. I guess I'm kind of boring because I really only have three places my story takes place: home, work, and church. I don't know if you all are kind of the same way, but that's where my story is. So home takes in everybody and everything around, going to Walmart that had to shut down in South Lakeland yesterday because the power went out. We were there. That was fun. But that all has to do with home. And then work, of course, I have lots of colleagues and people that I work with. And I have people that work for me, and then I work for people. So I'm kind of in the middle there. And then in, of course, my church, because that's the three places I mainly go, okay? So I am the main character in my story, but I'm also a supporting character in your story, right? Because you see me every Sunday, so I play an impact. Hopefully you miss me when I'm not here, or I miss you when you're not here, because we play supporting characters in each other's story. Well, my story is full of challenges and changes. I'll tell you a little bit about the changes first. So I've told you a little bit about my life. I was an only child. I lived in the same house from the time I was born until my dad moved out when I was 20. Same house. Everything was steady, routine, just like that. Then I married Greg. Things didn't stay that way very long. So we've been married 36 years, and we have lived in 10 homes. And you think, well, that's not too bad, 10 homes in 36 years. 7 of those homes came in the first 8 years of our marriage. Yeah, change, major change. Sometimes happy for the change, sometimes confused about the change. But we had various jobs. We had various bosses. We changed all those times, okay? We had to change where we lived. We changed where we worked. We changed our friends. That's very, very difficult. Change is hard. And think about, remember in the background where I'm going with this, what kind of thinking do I have when I experience change? Is it horizontal? Am I only thinking about myself? Or is it vertical? And do I think about what are the possibilities that God is trying to do with me in this change? I also had challenges. I have worked for challenging bosses. I know you all have too, right? And I've worked with challenging people, so much that I came this close to quitting a job one time because of a challenging person, and she ended up quitting that day, so I was good. I've gone to church with challenging people. I know you're all shocked at that. People in church can be challenging, right? Life is full of changes and challenges. Probably the most challenging thing I've done is Greg and I raising those 4 boys. That's a challenge. Parents, moms, hats off to you. I'm going to be talking to you about these changes and challenge. So I want you to think about for a minute, where are the main places that your story occurs? So you think about that. I saw Becky already did. She thought about her places. She nodded to me. Think about where your story occurs. What changes and challenges have you had, or maybe you're experiencing right now? So how we react with these changes and challenges are very, very important. They're important to us, and they're important to the people around us, whether we see horizontal or vertical. And I wonder if an author was writing a story about my life and they did tally marks for that horizontal, kind of a negative thinking, and that vertical, kind of a positive, where would most of the tally marks be? I just don't know. Well, I'm going to tell you, I've learned a little bit about myself, because everything in our lives doesn't always work out right, okay? Means it doesn't go my way. I have developed 3 basic tendencies. Now, when the slide comes up, you're going to see that it says we, because I'm hoping that some of you will jump on board with this and say, hey, I sort of react that way too. But when things don't work out the way we should, we, number 1, tend to respond negatively rather than positively. Now, some people more than others, right? Because I know that we all know kind of negative people. And some people are more positive others. But even a positive person, I consider myself kind of positive, I have the tendency to go negative when change is brought before me. I also, number 2, we tend to view problems horizontally rather than vertically. And we tend to resist what is new. And you know the weird part about all this? These tendencies seem to intensify as we grow older. Why? Because we like comfort. We like things the same. We like routine. So we have to think about, again, how our thinking is. So taking you back to the story of Joseph, I'm not going to focus on Joseph today, but I'm going to focus on Jacob. Because Jacob is the character in this story that embodies horizontal thinking. So he had trouble walking by faith. It blows my mind. Because he's the patriarch. Remember, God changed his name to Israel. We have a whole country on the other side of the world sort of named after him. Even though he had known God for well over 100 years, Jacob constantly wrestled with negativism, a horizontal viewpoint, and a closed, resisting mind. So we're going to look at that part of the story. Briefly, remember, he sent the brothers to Egypt because there was a famine in the land of Canaan. And Jacob said, we can't starve to death. I'm going to send all of you except Benjamin. Now, Jacob thought Joseph was dead. Benjamin he kept beside him. He had a very tight hold because Benjamin and Joseph were from the same mother, Rachel, that Jacob loved so dearly. And so the rest of the boys he sent, Joseph recognized him. They didn't recognize Joseph. They ended up getting the food that they needed, and Joseph put all the money back in their sack. Remember that? And then they went home, and they found all this money. So here is where we're going to pick it up. The brothers have made their way back home after going for food, and they now are going to tell Jacob about their experience. So if you remember, Joseph said to the brothers, he accused them of being spies. I kind of think that he was testing them to see if they had grown any. So he accused them of being spies, and they said, oh, no, we're not spies. We are from Canaan, and our father is there, and also our younger brother Benjamin. So Joseph knew that that was true, and he said, okay, bring your brother Benjamin back. And to make sure that you do this, I'm going to keep Simeon locked in the prison until you bring Benjamin back. So now all the boys, now there's 9 of them that go back, and they are going to tell their father. So we're going to pick it up in chapter 42, verse 36. I'm reading out of the ESV. Jacob exclaimed, remember the boys had just stood up and said, Dad, we have to go back to Egypt because the prime minister says we have to bring Benjamin back to prove we're not spies. Okay? Jacob exclaimed, you are robbing me of my children. Joseph is gone, Simeon is gone, and now you want to take Benjamin too. Everything is going against me. Now, this is an odd verse coming up to me. Then Reuben said to his father, you may kill my 2 sons if I don't bring Benjamin back to you. I think that was Reuben's way of saying, this is really true, Dad. This is true, and I'm going to secure their safety. We just need to take Benjamin back. Reuben said, I'll be responsible for him, and I promise to bring him back to you. But Jacob replied, this is very interesting, my son will not go down with you. His brother Joseph is dead, and he is all I have left. If anything should happen to him on your journey, you would send this grieving, white-haired man to the grave. So get this picture. They've told him what they need to do, and Jacob immediately shuts down and goes to the negative. So remember who this is. This is the patriarch, all right? He knew God, but his whole viewpoint at the time was very horizontal. Remember, they were given their food and then free money. What he really should have said was, oh my goodness, boys, look how God provided. Look how God provided for all of this food, and we got it free of charge. Now, I don't know the reason why the prime minister wants to take Benjamin back, but I don't need to know. We'll trust in God. We'll trust that Benjamin can go safely and come back, and then we'll have food and everything will be fine. But he did not do that. He saw none of that, none of the food they got, none of the money, any of that as God's provision. Why? Because he had a horizontal viewpoint. He was only thinking about himself. He actually froze in fear, and he went to the worst case scenario right away. You know how I know that? Because back in that verse it said Joseph is dead and Simeon is dead too. Simeon wasn't dead. He immediately jumped to the conclusion that Simeon was dead. So we're going to go negative right away. Now, I don't know about you, but I do know some people like that. The first response is negative. I'm going to be really honest with you. As Christians, that should not be our first response. Our first response is always, what is God trying to show me in this situation? So now we go further, and Jacob overreacted. I told you about Simeon. He thinks Simeon's dead. And then his last line, he said, everything is against me. Well, now he seems a little paranoid and self-pitying because he thinks now that what is happening, because he can't see God's view, so he thinks what is happening is directly affecting him, and that's all that matters. He's being very close-minded. But Jacob responds, and he's going to go even more negative here. You ready? He says, you can't take my son with you. His brother Joseph is dead, and he is the only one I have left. If anything should happen to him, I would die. Or get what he just said to his other sons. He went so negative that he basically said, the rest of you don't matter. I have one son left, it's Benjamin, and if he's gone, I will die. Wow. I can't imagine being so steeped in horizontal and negative thinking that I would intentionally hurt those that I love and that I care for. But it happens every day. We hear about it on the news. We hear about it from family and friends. Because horizontal thinking grips you. It grips you because you want control. And if you can't have control, then you go deep into this type of thinking that just buries you. You know, all Jacob could see was a worst-case scenario. Do you know what he failed to do? 3 simple words. Trust in God. That's what he failed to do. Because trusting in God takes us from that horizontal viewpoint to a vertical viewpoint. Well, you might be thinking, I would never do that. I always trust God. But would you really? What about last week? Did you trust God for everything last week? What about yesterday? I mean, let's think about that. Let's think about our 3 places. Remember, mine are home, work, and church. Can I honestly say that I trust God for everything in my home? That I trust God for everything in my work? And I trust God for everything in my church? Because that's where my story is. You know, moms and dads, I just have to and grandparents, let's go there. It's really, really important that your children and grandchildren witness you thinking vertically, not horizontally. Because if you immediately go to the bad, immediately go to the worst case scenario, guess what they're going to do when they get older? Exactly the same thing. So Jacob should have been the leader to point to God's view of the situation. He should have said, boys, things may be terrible and we do not understand what's happening. I'm so confused, but I know you have to take Benjamin back. Okay, so let's trust in God, that God will keep him safe, that you will be able to go release Simeon. Simeon will be released and come back. Let's all join hands and pray, or whatever they needed to do. There was also, I wonder what Jacob thought, why the money was returned. I mean, wouldn't that be a provision from God? He knows his boys didn't steal it, but he didn't even see that. You see, challenges and changes are not always partnered with getting things my way, but that's the way Jacob saw it. If it wasn't his way, he's in control, then it wasn't the right way. Why? This, horizontal thinking. He hadn't yet looked up. I saw this on social media. I thought it was interesting, so I just stuck it in here. It's hard to hear God's voice when you've already decided what you want him to say. Youch. I mean, let's think about that. Is that not horizontal thinking? When we already decided that our way must be God's way, we're not even listening for that voice. So I want us to break down what Jacob actually did. Number one, he denied and he delayed. So chapter 43, verses 1 and 2, now the famine's going on. Okay, the boys have been there a while. He did not let Benjamin go. He said, nope, not going to do it. And there they were. But the famine continued to ravage the land of Canaan. When the grain they had brought from Egypt was almost gone, Jacob said to his sons, go back and buy us more food. I can't imagine their reaction. Dad, we had this conversation. Simeon has been in prison for much longer than he should have been because you have refused to let us take Benjamin. And even in verse 10, one of the sons said, if we hadn't wasted all this time, we could have gone and returned twice by now. Sometimes we think maybe if we just ignore the challenge or the chain that happens in our life, that you just won't have to deal with it. But unfortunately, it comes back around. Number 2, Jacob blamed. Verse 6, why were you so cruel to me, Jacob moaned. Why did you tell him you had another brother? It's your fault we're in this situation. Sometimes when we focus on ourselves, that horizontal thinking, instead of putting our trust in God, we're not only resisting the change, but we have to find someone else to blame because, of course, it's not our fault. So we blame others. You know, sometimes we blame people that we work with, people that we live with, people that we go to church with, right? Our friends, our family, whatever that is. You know, we have to think about what was God thinking. Number 3, Jacob tolerated but still wanted to do it his way. I like this part. Jacob still has to have that little bit of control. So their father Jacob, I'm going to be in verse 11, I'm just telling you the story, finally said to them, if it can't be avoided, then at least do this. Pack your bags with the best products of the land and take them to the man as gifts. Also take double the money that was put back in your sacks. Take your brother and go back to the man. So what he's really saying is, all right, we're going to do it. You know, I've delayed, we're going to do it, but here's a good way, here's my way. Let's just put things this way. Let's pack up. See, remember he did that with Esau too. It's a way that Jacob stays in control. It's that horizontal thinking. He couldn't, again, just say, I want to take you back. Boys, we don't know what all this means, but we do know we're confused and need God's help. Let's trust him for protection and insight. And finally, what did he do? He gave in, but he was still thinking horizontally. Starting at verse 13, then take your brother and go back to the man. May God Almighty give you mercy as you go before the man, so that he will release Simeon and let Benjamin return. Listen to this last line. But if I must lose my children, so be it. So really, if he'd have just stopped before that last sentence, it would have been great. We would have thought, wow, Jacob, you've learned. May God Almighty give you mercy and release them. But what did he do? He turned it right back to that horizontal thinking, right back to himself. But if I must lose my children, then so be it. Right back to himself. It wasn't about God and the plans that God had for Jacob's family. When we view things from a horizontal viewpoint rather than vertical, we can resist what is new and perhaps a change God has for us. We know the end of the story, right? Jacob didn't know. Look at some of the time that he's wasted just by having a viewpoint that wasn't trusting in God. So the good news is we can change our thinking from horizontal to vertical. Why? Because we're in charge of that. We're in charge of the way we think, so we can change that thinking. Horizontal thinking will come natural to us because we're human, so we must intentionally make that shift. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, I'm still working on that. Some days are much better than others for me. And some days I really have to say more than once, stop, I can't think that way. I've got to think this way. So I'm going to give you some tips for changing from horizontal to vertical thinking. Number 1, recognize and admit it. Don't try to push it away and deny it. Other people see negative thinking in you before you see it. And if you say, we can all say to ourselves, I know her or I know him, he's a negative thinker. If you can't find people in your life that are negative thinkers, then you probably are the negative thinker. And they're saying that about you. Okay? So let's think about that. We must intentionally shift. So don't try to push it away. Instead, call out to God and just tell him, God, I'm so sorry, but I've fallen into the habit, because that's what it is. It's a habit of negative thinking. Number 2, force a vertical focus until it becomes your new way of thinking. That means every day you've got to intentionally look to God and not say, how is this impacting me? Look to God. And you're going to have to do that in all the places where your story is. Think about that. How do you do that? Well, I give you some tips. So these are ways that help me, okay? Some intentional responses. First one is, what do I say? Could God be in this? So when something makes me uncomfortable and I'm not seeing which way to go. Now, I'm going to tell you, it hasn't always been this way. I have a major situation in my life that I was the most horizontal thinker on the face of the earth. And if I would have remained that way, I wouldn't be where I am today professionally. I finally just had to let go and let God have charge of it. And I was, as they say, a hot mess through all of that. It's not easy to let go and just say, God, you know my life. Lead me where you want me to go. Is God trying to get through to me? Maybe God's trying to tell you something. Or what is God trying to teach me? Maybe you might say, Lord, how would you react to this right now? Instead of us, getting back and going negative right away. Or, Lord, I'm uncomfortable with this situation. Are you trying to show me how to grow? Number 3, stay open to new ideas for a time while you apply that vertical focus. There's changes all around us in every aspect of our life. We can't shut things down right away because God wants to move us. Imagine if we didn't move as people. If I were exactly the same way as I was 10 years ago, 5 years ago, or even 1 year ago, I'm not pleasing God. God wants me to grow. And that's going to involve change somewhere. Because remember, stagnant water doesn't change, it just sits there. We don't want to be stagnant. So, here's some tips for that. Don't respond with an immediate, nope, never, I'm not going to do that. So catch yourself before you respond with a no. Why are you saying that? Is it just your opinion about something? Or is there really some reason that you think God, really turn to God for that? Second one, just wait a little bit and tolerate that possibility for a little bit. Allow yourself to participate in the new. Because God opens doors. I've had conversations recently with people about this. I have always been a firm believer that God opens doors in our lives, and we are to walk through them until he closes them. God will open those doors, but sometimes we're afraid to walk through them, or we slam them. No, God, not going to do that. So let's go to the ending of the story. We know that Jacob reacted with a horizontal mindset. He said, no, you can't go back. You can't take Benjamin. And then he waited till his family was practically starving again before he actually let them go. He did not have a vertical outlook. He wasn't saying, God, are you trying to teach me something in this? So we're going to go a little bit ahead here. We know that Joseph reveals himself to his family. The boys were there. Joseph revealed himself. And he said, go get your father. I'm going to take care of you. We pick the story back up in chapter 46, verse 29. Joseph prepared his chariot, traveled to Goshen to meet his father, Jacob. When Joseph arrived, he embraced his father and wept, holding him for a long time. Man, that must have been great. Finally, Jacob said to Joseph, now I'm ready to die since I've seen your face again, and I know you are still alive. But in hindsight, Jacob could see things through a vertical lens. That happens to us. I turned around and I've looked at my life 15 years ago. It has a clear direction from God. Clear. I couldn't see it back then. So I was trying to hang on to things. But not only did God have plans for reconciliation for Jacob and his family, he had plans to bless them. You know, God always, he has plans for us and he always gets his way. But it is a lot more painful when we fight him and resist his leading based on negative, horizontal thinking. So think about the challenges and the changes that you face in your story. What might they be? Are you using a horizontal focus or a vertical focus as you approach those changes and challenges? You know, horizontal thinking, that focus holds things tight. They try to control situations. Sometimes, this was me, by manipulating others or convincing others that I was so right because I didn't get that job. Or I should have received the raise. Or maybe, to go even further, pointing out other people's faults just to bring the attention back to me. That's horizontal thinking. Could it be at that moment in time that I didn't trust God enough to just let go and let him have his way? Vertical thinking lets go. You don't understand why things might be happening. You walk through those open doors and you let God lead. So what does your story sound like? Will it be your name, Lori Rakes, the story of a horizontal life? Will it be Lori Rakes, the story of a vertical life? So it all boils down to one question. Do you trust God enough to let go of that horizontal thinking? Do you trust him? See, as Christians, that's not something that we should be doing. We should be aligning with vertical thinking in every day. What is it that you need to trust God for in your life? Have you been practicing horizontal thinking rather than vertical thinking? If so, I want you to take the challenge this week of, in those areas of your story, wherever your story is, to practice vertical thinking in every situation. God, are you trying to teach me something? What is it that you want me to learn? God has wonderful plans for all of us in every area, but we need to give him control and let go.